Right. I mean, I hear this from the Israeli side, but nobody seems to be able to produce any concrete evidence. And I understand slightly the fog of war, but the significance of this is that if you can't actually produce hard evidence of how many Hamas terrorists you're killing, and the death toll of innocent civilians keeps rising and rising and rising, as it has done now, over 15,000 by the Hamas-run health authorities' estimation, you know the public opprobrium that's coming Israel's way the longer this goes on. Isn't it incumbent on Israel to actually be able to produce clear evidence of the volume of Hamas terrorists you're killing? Because if there are 35,000 of them and you've only killed 1,000 or 2,000 so far, then the fear is that the civilian death toll is going to be 100,000, 200,000 before you can even think about eradicating Hamas. What is the line for Israel? Is there one? Or is there no limit on civilian casualties so long as you've still got Hamas terrorists to kill?
So first of all, we don't want to see a single civilian casualty. You've heard me say that before, and we mean it. We don't want to see civilians caught up in the crossfire. That's why we're urging people to leave combat zones. It's common sense. If we don't want to see them get caught up in the fighting between the Israeli Defense Forces and Hamas, please, we urge people to leave combat zones, and most of the civilians do so. Hamas, as you know, and has been reported, they've urged people to stay, ordered people to stay even at gunpoint, because they want those Gazan civilians as a human shield. But what right-minded person agrees to be a human shield for Hamas? Of course they want to leave, and we have to facilitate their leave. And even now, as we move towards our ground incursion in the south, I can assure you that escape routes will be there for the civilians to still reach the safe areas, because we don't want to see them come into harm's way. And we'll make every effort possible. About the numbers, and you ask a good question. Look, we could just articulate numbers the way Hamas does and just make them up and throw them out there. No, we're very precise. And if we don't have a precise number, we're not going to make one up. When I say in the thousands, I know what I'm talking about. It's more than 2,000. It's in the thousands. But we don't want to say numbers that we're not 100% sure. But I can say something that we are sure of. Look, we're fighting a difficult war against a brutal terrorist organization in an urban area. And if we compare ourselves to, let's say, what the West did against ISIS in places like Mosul and Fallujah, I am sure when this is over, and you can have me back if this is not true, but I am sure, because I know this to be the case. When one looks at what the experts call the combat to civilian death ratio, yes? And you will compare the IDF's behavior in Gaza together with against what the West did in, let's say, places like Mosul and Fallujah, I think the IDF's going to come out very favorably.
How favorably will Israel come out with what's going on with the settlers on the West Bank? I watched a very disturbing report on the BBC from Jeremy Bowen tonight, where there is clear, huge aggression from Israeli settlers against Palestinians, a lot of deaths, and Hamas are not involved there. They're not the controlling body. How do you feel about that?
So first of all, we did have a terrible terrorist attack in Jerusalem just a few days ago, where Hamas shot at people waiting at a bus stop on their way to work. I think that was that Friday morning or Thursday morning last week? That was widely reported. Hamas doesn't control the West Bank, but Hamas has violent cells across the West Bank that are there, and they've wanted to activate those cells. And that's why we had those murderous attacks in Jerusalem just a few days ago. Hamas is there. They're more underground on the West Bank, but they're still a threat. And we've tried to be as proactive as we can be in trying to go out there and arrest Hamas activists. Look, Hamas in Gaza is under a lot of pressure. So they've sent messages to all their cells in the West Bank. This is a time for you guys to kill Jews, yes? And they succeeded, unfortunately, last week. But we have limited their ability to kill people by being proactive, arresting people in the middle of the night, taking out these Hamas activists.
Does wiping out villages and looking like you are encroaching more and more with the settlements throughout this conflict, is that not just incredibly inflammatory to the Palestinian people living in the West Bank?
Piers, there's been no villages that have been wiped out.
Well, I literally saw one on the BBC where it's been almost demolished and the people have been displaced. 200 or so had been displaced permanently.
So once again, I'm not sure what you're talking about, and I apologize for not having that information. But the Israeli policy on the West Bank is to live and let live, yes? And if Palestinians are not involved in violence...
Mr. Regev, with respect, that's not what's been
I disagree.
happening.
I mean, it's obviously been a difficult period, but we have so far managed to keep, and despite the fatalities we had last week, yes, it could be a lot worse. But through our actions, we've managed to keep the level of violence